Hello. Today, we have me, Ingrid, Stella, and Mr. H. We're gonna do social studies right now.
Yep, you should be at the end of week 5 where you have been working with Indian removal, looking at our last video and answering the questions. This week we're going to do the same format, but we're going to be talking a little more broadly about westward expansion. We will review a couple of the things we did last week, and we will add to that a little bit. We looked at how the Native Americans were marginalized or discriminated against or oppressed. And this week we are going to look at some other groups that were negatively affected by westward expansion. And your short answer question is going to be how the U.S. government could make amends for those people. We'll look at some things that they've done with different groups that were a little more peaceful and a little more fair. And then we will look at some of the things they've done that have been less fair. And then you all will make a decision on how they could make amends to the victims of westward expansion. So our procedures will be
Watch the entire video, like the whole thing. So if you did watch the video, comment about me or this girl, and don't say, I watched the video so I did this, so people don't copy off of you.
Thank you. That's a good idea. There are going to be 5 supporting questions, and I would like you to answer those in complete sentences. And to do that, also, they should complete the short answer at the end, Ingrid. That the short answer is going to be about what the U.S. government could do to make amends for all the terrible things that they did to people.
And don't zoom to the end. Just watch the video, because we're going to have some things in the middle that you need to do.
Yep. That would be the supporting questions. You're absolutely right. And much like the week 5 stuff, there will be an attached Google Doc that has the questions and room for you to answer. We'll have the supporting questions and the short answer at the end, which is kind of in compelling question form. But I'm looking for a much shorter version of that than when we write long arguments. So you ready?
Mm-hmm.
You sure?
Mm-hmm.
All right. The standards that we are looking at for this week have to do with the impact of growth and expansion on resources and economic incentives. So we'll look a little bit at the money part of it. We will be looking at maps to look at settlement patterns and where territories were added and where people moved to during this time period, which is going to be roughly 1803 or so up to, this will get us all the way up to the beginning of the Civil War around 1860, 1850, 1860. We're going to have a war with Mexico, Ingrid. Were you aware that such a thing happened?
No.
Okay, you will be by the time we end this. And lastly, some of the causes and effects of westward expansion. And after that, the last week and a half of the school year will be taken up by causes of the Civil War. We may not get to Reconstruction. I'll have to work this out with the other social studies teachers, but we'll do what we can.
Do you mean we already had a war with the Mexicans?
Yes.
Or we are going to?
We had one a long time ago in the 1840s.
Yes. Did we win?
Yeah. Well, it's not all good. We weren't very nice. We'll get to some of those. You ready?
Uh-huh.
All right. So, westward expansion. This will be a little bit of a review of something we talked about in an earlier video. I'm going to show you the map. This was the United States at the end of the Revolutionary War. It was basically the Northeast. Shortly after that, and one of the first topics we're going to look at is the Louisiana Purchase, which Jefferson bought from France in 1803. We've also talked about that a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit more about the addition of Florida from Spain. and the annexation of Texas, which I believe I lamented earlier that we didn't have an opportunity to talk about. I'm going to talk a little bit more about today. This will be something I go into a little more detail. We're going to get this disputed land from England, and we are going to talk about the land that Mexico is going to give up at the end of the Mexican War. And just for kicks, this tiny little piece at the bottom here called the Gadsden Purchase. We will cover that. So the topics we're going to be looking at today for Westward Expansion are going to be, you ready, Ingrid?
Yep.
You reading them?
Yep.
Cool.
Louisiana Purchase, Lewis and Clark. Missouri and Florida. Trails of Tears.
Annexation's that word.
Annexation of Texas slavery.
That's kind of, we call it an annexation. That's a nice way of saying we took it. It was Mexico and we kind of like took over. I'll get into that later.
Mexican War, California. Oregon Territory, British claims.
All right, so these will be, and of course the Gadsden Purchase, which I mentioned earlier. These will be the topics we're going to cover today, and there'll be 5 questions mixed in there. I'm going to combine some of these things. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we've already talked about this concept of manifest destiny, but I just want to review it in a different way because I want you all thinking about this and in the background of what we're talking about. The idea of this creepy white lady floating across, she symbolizes what people of European descent, settlers and colonizers, would have considered progress. So she's moving from east to west, bringing the light with her, chasing away the bears and the Native Americans and all the darkness, and bringing in all these different modes of transportation. If you look closely, there are railroads, there are steamships in the back, there are people with wagons, there's stagecoaches. So she's bringing in her hands a telegraph wire. So she's bringing all these different forms of technology, which they're looking at as progress in this painting. So there was a belief. Do you want to do this one? All right, go ahead.
The belief that the United States was destined, or even
divinely
ordained
Yep.
to grow from the Atlantic to the Pacific and from the Arctic to the tropics.
Do you know what divinely ordained means? That means they feel like God told them that they could take over the whole half of the earth.
Not true. Quick fact, not true. False.
I'm just saying they
Totally
believed
false.
it. That was like their destiny. That was why they were brought over to America from Europe, because God wanted them to take over the whole thing.
Totally not true.
There's a couple other ideas that are wrapped up in this.
Never believe it.
Would you like to?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
The nation of Memphis destiny blended a belief expansion
In expansionism, that's the idea of growing bigger and bigger,
with the popular ideas such as America.
American exceptionalism, which means if you were American, which in this time period meant if you were a white American, that you were better. If you were part of the country, you were better than other countries. And nationalism has to do with the idea, again, of a love of your country. So there's people like, if you love America because we're better than other people, then you understand why we have the God-given right to move all the way across the country. And there was also a belief in the natural superiority of the Anglo-Saxon or the white race. These would be people from Northern Europe, not necessarily all of Europe. So this is what we would now call white nationalism in a lot of ways. The yawning is just really, it's disheartening. It hurts.
You let me up, but
all right. So, topics we're going to get into: Louisiana Purchase. The two men at the bottom are Thomas Jefferson and Napoleon Bonaparte. I believe these are their high school yearbook photos. They're not, they're paintings. See the guy in the fancy, the guy with the dark hair, he's French. And the other fella is Thomas Jefferson. But if you look at the area in the middle of the map, what color is that, Ingrid?
Red.
In red, where it says Louisiana Purchase, that whole giant area is what Jefferson bought from Napoleon. So Jefferson believed in something we talked about a long time ago, which was a strict interpretation of the Constitution, that as president, he only had the right to do what was directly and specifically written into the Constitution.
That was 3 cents to buy that whole thing.
Per acre. It ended up being millions of dollars, but it's a big area. So anyway, he ignored all these ideas he had about a strict interpretation of the Constitution to buy the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon, and he paid about 3 cents an acre.
Is that a lot?
No, it's not. It included parts of North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, Nebraska, Wyoming, Montana, Minnesota, New Mexico, and
Texas.
And Texas. So that's a big area. Have you been to any of those places, Ingrid?
I've been to all of them.
You've been to all of them. Are you serious? Okay, you have. She's been to all of them. I'm sorry, that was a little humble brag there. I apologize for throwing that one in. So it goes from the Mississippi River all the way to the Rocky Mountains, and it goes from the Gulf of Mexico down where New Orleans is, all the way up into what is now Canada.
Canada?
Canada! Yeah, yes, Canada. Thank you, Ingrid, for that. So after the Louisiana Purchase was made, Thomas Jefferson secretly sent one of his secretaries, who was a military guy named Meriwether Lewis, and Meriwether Lewis brought along his friend William Clark, and they went to explore the newly acquired land. Do you know what Fallsville, Ohio is, Ingrid? You remember when we went there, the fossil beds?
Oh, yeah.
You know there's a big statue of the two guys in funny hats shaking hands? Do you remember it? Okay, that's Lewis and Clark. That's where they met up. You know what Clarksville is named after?
No.
William Clark's grandfather.
Okay.
Who was a Revolutionary War hero.
What about York? What about him?
Would you like to learn a little bit about York?
I don't know.
You don't know? Well, let's see. There's a picture of York. Well, it's a picture of a statue. Have you ever been to Louisville?
Yeah.
Okay. This statue right there is in downtown Louisville.
So we've seen that statue.
I have. I can't recall. It's near the river, and it's a little farther up than we usually go when we go down to like Waterfront Park and stuff.
And who's the lady?
That's an excellent question. Her name was Sacagawea. Have you ever heard of her?
Ooh, yeah. I have a lot of books about her.
All right. We're going to talk about her a little bit, too.
Like Bird Girl.
Yeah. We're going to talk about her. I'm going to give you a couple of pieces of information that I bet are not in your books. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the mission for Lewis and Clark, they called themselves the Corps of Discovery. They were supposed to explore the Louisiana Territory. They were supposed to establish trade with Native American groups. And most importantly, they were supposed to let the Native Americans know that the U.S. government was in charge. They were the authority now. So these people who had lived for thousands of years out in the western part of the United States, all of a sudden were being told by these pasty, pale-looking people that there was a new boss. Thomas Jefferson thought that there might be woolly mammoths out there. He was wrong. He also thought that the lost tribe of Israel might be out there.
Wrong. False. Yeah. Totally false. Don't believe that.
Don't give away too much. But yes, it was totally and completely false. So there were 33 people in there, including Sacagawea, who's pictured there. I believe that's a yearbook photo.
I like Sacagawea.
And you want to know an interesting yet very sad fact about Sacagawea?
She died.
Well, of course she died. This was like a couple of hundred years ago. So, but anyway, she was kidnapped during a war when she was a young girl.
How old?
I think around 12. And you know what they did? They sold her to this French guy. I believe his name was Carbonneau. And that became her husband. And the Carbonneau guy got hired to go with the Corps of Discovery. They picked him up along the way, and he brought his wife along to interpret. Although on the upside,
Wait,
she
so
ran
there's
into
two?
her brother while she was out there in the West.
Wait, so that boy had like 2 wives.
No, that was his only wife.
Oh.
She was pregnant at the time. She had a baby while she was out exploring the West.
Wait, did you just say she was 12?
No, this was after that.
Okay, good.
She wasn't having babies at 12.
Good.
She was at least 12 and a half. Just kidding, Ingrid. She was a little bit older than that. And York was enslaved by the Clark family, so he went along to help out mostly Clark, but exploration. And he was very, very popular when he went out west because although some of the Native Americans had seen a few white people before, most had never seen a black guy, and they just thought he was not only a handsome fella, but they just thought he was really neat. So he was very popular.
What about Sacagawea? Did they think she was popular?
They had seen lots of Indian women by that point because they were, Indians. There were a bunch of different tribes, though, about 50 different ones, at least.
Hey.
So they bartered with and presented these tribal leaders with this Jefferson Indian Peace Medal, which is at the top. There's a picture of the front, a picture of the back. And that's when they were told, we are here peacefully, and this is the new boss. And if you want it to remain peacefully, you are going to be subject to our friend, Mr. Jefferson.
Mr. Jefferson.
You know what they used to tell the Indians?
What?
This is your great father. They were. It was an ugly time.
Uglier than him.
Wow. They failed to find the Northwest Passage. I should have mentioned earlier, Northwest Passage is, they also thought that there was a water route to get from the eastern half of the United States all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It is a lot, which is why there's not one. They have these mountains. You ever been to the Rocky Mountains? She has, as another little humble brag there. You've been a couple of times, actually. Anyway.
I've been at least 15 times.
Okay, by 15, she means 2. But they could not find a river route to get them all the way across. But they did travel more than 8,000 miles. They made maps. They identified about 120
So they walked
animals.
8,000 miles a day?
Well, they had boats.
Okay.
But they walked a big chunk of the way. They split up at one point, and they ended up all the way out in Oregon in this fort that they had to build, and they had to stay the winter there, which is a pretty ugly time. But they made it back. It took them a few years.
That's pretty harsh if they had to stay the winter because, it's right next to the ocean.
Yep. They had to, it wasn't very smart to be right next to the ocean in the freezing cold and the snow and all that kind of stuff.
My friend used to live in Oregon.
Who's that?
There's a boy in my class who moved here from Oregon. His name is Wendell.
Oh, nice. And they also found 200 around new plant and flower species, and they brought most of these samples of almost all these things back with them to give to Jefferson. You digging at your ear there? Take it easy.
No.
We're here on business. All right. Did you roll your eyes at me? Oh, my goodness. So, supporting question number 1. Ingrid?
How is the way the U.S. dealt with France different than how the default with Native Americans?
They dealt with Native Americans. So they...
Is there such thing as New Spain?
Not anymore.
Okay, good. Because New Spain, that's...
Well, now, we're going to get to that, but it's going to end up being a part. In 1803... New Spain was passed there. Then it became Mexico because I don't want to give anything away, but the Mexican's going to kick the Spanish out. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. So differences between how they interacted with France to get Louisiana and how they dealt with the Native Americans when they were exploring it. And only one things that I've talked about in this video.
Blah, blah, blah,
So
blah, blah.
we're going to throw Missouri and Florida in together just
Do they
because
actually like the two
it's
states
simpler.
like each other?
Missouri and Florida.
Mhm.
Florida is known for. Remember we talked about Florida Man, the crazy stories out of Florida. Florida scares people.
Oh.
They got alligators. Remember the big spiders when we went to Florida?
Yeah, one time we went to Florida and there was a tiny alligator in the lake, so I had to stay with my mom.
I think that was in Louisiana.
No, that was in Florida.
You talking about the? It was in Louisiana. We went to Florida on that same trip, but it was Louisiana. How about we get back to business?
Okay, I saw a tiny alligator and it was so cute.
It was. But you were tiny, so we didn't let you go down there by it. So anyway, we are looking at Missouri and Florida. For Missouri, in 1819, it became the first state that was created by the Louisiana Purchase. There was a debate in Congress. Should it be a free state? Should they allow slavery there?
No slavery in the free state.
Well,
That's probably not what they
unfortunately,
said.
there was this guy from Kentucky named Henry Clay, who in 1820 came up with this compromise. You will know Henry Clay as the great compromiser, and generally his compromises involve the expansion of slavery.
Wait, is he good?
No, not really.
Okay.
He helped slavery expand and last longer.
That means he's an nincompoop?
A little bit. The deal was that Missouri would become a slave state, or they would increase slavery, but Maine, which is all the way at the top there, would become a new state. It had been part of Massachusetts, and it would be a free state. And so that way, there would be the same number of states that allowed slavery and same number of states that were free, just to make voting in Congress a little more equitable, obviously, for the slave states. And there's also a line, it's the 36th parallel at the 3630 line. And if you look on the map where the Arkansas Territory is, you will see a line. And if you extend it, it separates like Kentucky and Tennessee and all that. But starting in the south of Missouri, that line extending all the way west was going to be the difference. If you were above that line, you had to be a free state. If you were below that line, you had to allow for slavery.
Do we have to allow for slavery?
Well, during this, I don't want to give away too much. I'm going to tell Ingrid real quick. You all take a little break there. During the Civil War, our governor was pro-slavery, but the legislature was not. So we never officially took a side, but we definitely allowed slavery to exist. I'm sorry. That's okay. Well, it's not okay. It's terrible. But we ended up at the end of the Civil War. Are you laughing at me?
You
All right.
said that's okay. No.
Let's do Florida. So in Florida, Spanish started in 1565 colonizing Florida. Over time, there were disputes about the boundaries. Spain got in different wars with England and France a little bit, sometimes on the side of France. Anyway, they lost some money, and they really had a hard time hanging on to Florida. Plus, it's full of spiders and alligators, so really, what was the,
Yuck.
So in 1819, Spain agreed to give up the remainder of its old province. They signed a treaty and they gave it over to the United States.
Woohoo!
Hold on to your woohoo. There's always a bad side. So formal U.S. occupation of Florida began in 1821 with a guy we talked about before, General Andrew Jackson, who was appointed the military governor, and he immediately started attacking and burning the Seminole Indian villages.
That's not a good thing.
It's not a good thing. What are known historically as the First Seminole War started during this time, which was basically the U.S. led by Andrew Jackson in there trying to steal land. The Second Seminole Wars were when they tried to get them to all leave. It was pretty bad.
Pretty bad.
All right.
I'm happy I didn't live in that time.
That's all right. So question number 2 is going to be similar to question number 1, but we're just talking about different groups. We're trying to build up with this, what should the U.S. do for these marginalized groups?
Can I read it?
I don't know. Can you?
Dad.
Go ahead.
How is the way in which the U.S. dealt with Spain and the way in which they dealt with Native American tribes different?
So for our purposes here, we are talking about Spain and Seminoles in Florida for this question.
I see a bunch of dead people in the picture, and it's kind of creepy.
Yeah, it's from the Seminole Wars.
But that was a war.
I just talked about it. You got to pay attention.
Okay, whatever. Okay, let's go on.
Fortunately, my students have trained me on the idea that kids don't pay attention. All right, Trail of Tears.
Trail of Tears. So you could always see it because there were a bunch of water from all the tears. Okay, that's not true.
It's not. You want to know why they call it Trail of Tears?
Because a bunch of people on it were very sad or mad.
They were. You ready to find out who? All right. So the Trail of Tears, we talked about this before, so I'm going to go kind of quickly here. It was the forced relocation of Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole, and a few other Indian nations to territory west of the Mississippi. You look at the map on here, you can see the lines from where they were forced east into a small area, which was Oklahoma, which I mentioned 2 weeks ago. So the Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole are considered the 5 civilized tribes because some of them stayed behind. So approximately during the 1830s, about 100,000 people were forced out. 15,000 of those people died. It was due to malnutrition, which means they didn't have enough food to eat, exhaustion because many of them walked the entire way. That would include children and the elderly. People who were sick. Yep. Exposure because this took a long time, and so they were out in the rain, they were out in the snow. Huh?
I just pick a donkey.
They also contracted things like smallpox, malaria, measles, cholera, whooping cough, the influenza, and pneumonia.
Sucks. Trust me, I never want to get cholera, even though it's not around. That is a horrible thing to get.
It's still around every once in a while if you have unclean places.
Are you kidding me?
Here, yes. You know how you get cholera? You drink water that's infected with poop. Anyway, here is a newspaper reporter who only identifies as an observer from Maine, describing part of this Trail of Tears. Would you like to stop yawning long enough to read this, or you want me to read it?
Yeah, read it.
Go ahead.
On Tuesday evening, we fell into
a detachment
of the poor Cherokee. Is that Cherokee?
Yeah.
Cherokee Indians, about 1,100. Wow, 1,100. We found them in the forest, camped for the night under a severe fall of rain. Many of the aged Indians,
those are the older ones,
were suffering extremely from the
fatigue, like how hard it was to make the journey, and ill health. I'm going to finish this up. All right. We found the road literally filled with a procession of nearly 3 miles in length. The sick and the feeble were carried in wagons. Feeble means they were weak. Multitudes, or the largest numbers of them, go on foot. Even aged females, apparently nearly ready to drop in the grave, were traveling with heavy burdens. So you had to carry all your stuff, most of them, on the sometimes frozen ground with no covering for their feet. So they had to walk through the snow and ice barefoot. They buried 14 or 15 at every stopping place. So every time they'd stop to rest, there were already 14 or 15 new dead people. That's why they called it the Trail of Tears. That's why it was so sad. Exactly.
First of all, I'd ride a donkey, and then I'd get a very little pack and put it on the donkey, and
Well, a lot of these people, when they showed up and they said, "You're leaving right now," and they marched them right off of them with whatever they could carry. And there were white people waiting, and they would just move right in and take over their houses and their farms, like even before the people were out of sight from walking away. It was awful. So I'm going to spend just a little more time talking about the annexation of Texas, because this is going to involve, in a large part, the expansion of slavery, more so than probably the other areas. So in 1821, Mexico kicked Spain out. If you've ever been to Central or South America, or for those of you who are from there, pretty much every town has the time statue commemorated to the time they kicked the Spanish out. It's awesome.
yeah.
Well, the Spanish were colonizers and they were settlers, and they were really, really horrible to the people who lived there. So the people were excited about kicking them out.
Woohoo!
There you go. So after the Mexicans kicked out Spain, they encouraged Americans to settle in what was the Texas territory. They wanted them to eventually become Mexican citizens, learn Spanish, and convert to Catholicism.
They said no.
It's like you already know. So they all moved there under "Yes, we promise." And another thing that was part of Mexican law was slavery was illegal in the Texas territory. So you know what the white settlers did? They brought the enslaved people anyway. So at this time, along the South, cotton is becoming the big cash crop, and is important to have a lot of people to pick the cotton, to process it. And during this time period, as you all are aware of, they enslaved people.
Why did they want them to pick the cotton?
Well, that's a very good question that we'll be answering next week when we talk about the Civil War.
Use it for their clothes.
Yes, they would send it north to the factories where the mills were, and that's where they would make clothes for people and blankets and things. So the
Is that like
north,
out of?
yes. So that she's pointing at a cotton blanket. The North was exploiting the South for their resources, but the people who perpetuated the slave system were happy to sell to the North because the very minimal amount of money they had into the working. So there was a big desert between Texas and Mexico, but there was a river, only the Mississippi River, separating Mexico, or separating Texas from the United States. So there was they kind of had more of a tie geographically to the United States and the port of New Orleans, where a lot of these shipments of cotton went out. Then they had to Mexico, so they were kind of independent. Also, the Mexican Constitution during most of the time favored the rights of these states or territories over the federal government. But in 1824, Mexican government there was a leadership change, and the Constitution was rewritten to give more power to the federal government. Mexico was kind of in turmoil, going back and forth after for a while after the Spanish were forced to leave. So in 1834, the Texas legislature, all the white settlers, declared independence from Mexico. They said, we're not going to be part of Mexico anymore.
That good thing?
Not for, well, because they were expanding slavery, no. So fighting breaks out in 1835 in the town of Gonzales. Basically, what happened is the U.S. sent troops, and they hung around. Well, we'll get to the U.S. troop story in a minute. The Texans captured San Antonio, which was a fort and a city. And so the Mexican general Santa Anna marched north with a massive army.
That's not a good thing.
Oh no, there was some fighting in the Mexican army in between February and March of 1836. at the Battle of the Alamo overran the Texans. Well, it's kind of a weird one because the Texans were, wanting to expand slavery and they wanted to take over. Like, imagine if a bunch of people uh, went to Fort Knox and took over and said, "We want Kentucky to be its own state and we want to have slavery." We wouldn't really support them.
We'd get a knife out of the kitchen.
Well, I don't know if kitchen knives would stop them, but we would definitely not support them. So the Mexican army overran all the Texans at the Battle of the Alamo. In April 21st, though, the Texans defeated the Mexican army at the Battle of San Jacinto. Santa Anna, who was the Mexican general in the Battle of the Alamo, was captured, and that pretty much sealed Texas's independence. And in 1845, the independent state of Texas became part of the United States. So, in an effort to expand slavery, the people of Texas the white settlers fought a war with Mexico and became their own independent state and eventually part of the United States. So, what is the connection between the annexation of Texas, or Texas being separated from Mexico and becoming part of the United States, and the expansion or the growth of the slave system in the South? I just explained it. It has to do with bringing slavery where they're not allowed and then using them to work. Yeah. All right. Ingrid's getting a little bored, as I'm sure maybe one or two of you might be. All right. War with Mexico. So here is a map of some of the battles and some of the routes that the U.S. Army went through in the war with Mexico. So right after Texas became a state, the U.S. sent troops down along the Nueces River, which right now is in the middle of Texas, and they basically picked a fight with the Mexican army who was on the other side of the river and started a war. So the American army overran most of Mexico, made it all the way to Mexico City, took that over, and the war ended in 1848 with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And afterwards, Mexico sold more than half of its territory to the United States as a result. Do you remember when you asked me about New Spain? That was all the territory that Mexico sold to the U.S. It's a giant chunk. Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Utah, all parts of those states.
Wait, so now that's all attached to...
It's all part of the United States, but it was Mexico then.
Wait, seriously? It was Mexico?
Yeah. Texas was Mexico. I know, because, we colonized that whole area, we tend to forget that it was somebody else's country. And by forget, I mean ignore.
Did we, buy Kentucky? Was Kentucky already there?
Okay, we're kind of getting sidelined here, but I'll get this one real quick. Virginia claimed Kentucky, and then once people started to settle, whites started to settle in Kentucky, they drove out the Native Americans that lived there.
Oopsie.
Now, big parts of Kentucky were a hunting ground, but not all of it.
Are there still some people?
Yeah.
That aren't Americans in Kentucky?
Yep. So, here are some of the things I just mentioned to my friend Ingrid, so I won't go through them again, but here are the territories that were agreed upon during the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that Mexico would give up at the end of the war.
Of this blue thing, I've been to all, Texas,
you have
California,
been to all of them.
Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Wyoming, Arizona, and Colorado. My favorite was New Mexico, just to be honest.
New Mexico was nice. All right. Question 4. Through what 2 methods did the U.S. add land during the war with Mexico?
Is that the U.S.
So they got
massive?
that's
Okay, the U.S. looks like it's going to win on that.
This is the U.S. over on the left,
Okay,
and Mexico on the right. You see
the
the
US
flags?
looks like it's going to win. Yeah, the U.S. looks like it's going to win.
They end up winning, but they got parts of what is now the United States from Mexico in two different ways. So I want the kids to pick those two out. All right, we're going to talk about. I'm going to go through real quickly this British territory that was Oregon. What color is that? That says Oregon there.
That's purple.
All right, the purple we're going to be talking about, and that line across there it says British. It's a little blurry. What's it say there?
Which one?
Right there.
British Frosty
Treaty?
Line?
No?
Yeah, British Treaty Line 15
right.
something.
All right, here we go. The British rejected a proposal by President Tyler to divide the region along the 49th parallel, which is that line that Ingrid and I were just trying to figure out what it said. Americans protested, and they wanted to claim
right.
they wanted to claim Oregon all the way up through where it says Russian Alaska. And that line would have been the 5440 line, which is the right above where it says Oregon. So in 1845, James K. Polk was elected president on the slogan 5440 or fight, because everybody wanted to have Oregon all the way up to the 54th parallel, which is the top of the purple.
We got it.
As politicians often do, he gave in and we didn't get it. So in 1846, he accepted a compromise treaty that split it along that line that goes down the middle. That's where the United States currently has a border with Canada. So the top part that says Oregon is in Canada, but the bottom part that says country is, why are you doing that, you weirdo? Is
Oregon is that thingy-mabob, Oregon.
But not the whole Oregon territory, just the bottom half. It's
but my
currently
friend
Oregon.
used to live up here.
Not in the top part, that's Canada. Half of it's Oregon, the other half is Canada.
But he said he used to live in Oregon.
Well, this bottom part's still Oregon.
Okay.
Killing me. All right. And the Gadsden Purchase. The reason I'm throwing in the Gadsden Purchase is not only that it's actually happened, but it is a different way that they dealt with a group of people. This will help you with the end. So at the bottom of the New Mexico territory, there was a big chunk of land there that was kind of in dispute. It was along a river, which is where Mexico thought it would end. The U.S. thought it should end a little bit farther south. There were Native Americans that actually lived there who they never really asked. They just kind of harassed and attacked them, and tried to run them out. So anyway, there was an agreement between U.S. and Mexico. The U.S. paid $10 million for these 29,670 square miles that eventually become part of Arizona and New Mexico. So Mexico removed Americans from the Mesilla Valley, and the governor of New Mexico declared it part of the New Mexico territory. That was kind of the dispute. So Santa Anna, who you may remember from him being defeated earlier, sent in troops, and Franklin Pierce sent the U.S. minister to Mexico, James Gadsden, to negotiate. So instead of sending the troops and overrunning them, the U.S. at this point negotiates a purchase. So he renegotiated a border that provided a route for a southern railroad, which is why they wanted to be away from the river, and arranged for the release of U.S. obligations for Native American attacks, which means the U.S. now no longer had to be responsible to help out when Native Americans fought back against the Mexican government. Because, it was a Native American land, and the Mexican government, much like the U.S. government, was kind of trying to take it over. So, question number 5. How were the ways in which the U.S. dealt with the British, that would be in the Oregon Territory, and Mexico through the Gadsden Purchase, how are those things similar? I just said it. All right. See, instead of attacking, they had a treaty that they negotiated with the British and a treaty that they negotiated with the Mexicans to get the territory.
Okay.
There was a compromise and money instead of like overrunning them and attacking them.
Okay.
All right. Here comes the short answer question. And as all your short answers, it should include some text evidence there. So, how could the U.S. make amends to the victims of westward expansion? So, I want you to describe how an affected group was treated. It could be the enslaved people that we talked about with Texas and even a little bit in Missouri. It could be the Native Americans. We talked about the Seminoles. We talked about the Trail of Tears. Or it could be the Mexicans who we went to war with. And I want you to compare those to how the U.S. government dealt with other groups, British, Spain, France, the Gadsden Purchase. So what you would say is the U.S. historically treated these groups like, or the enslaved people were victims of westward expansion because, and then what they should do to make up for it is the same thing they did when they wanted to get, I don't know, one of these other territories. So instead of treating people poorly, murdering, how else could they have done it?
I know, like a way for like the Americans to win. You have this little tray behind them in the line, and then they like take them back if they get hurt, and they kill them. And
all right, we're talking about being nice to people instead of like fighting and killing.
Okay, good.
All right. So, young people, have a great weekend. Take care of yourselves.
And don't turn into a gorilla.
That's Bigfoot.
Okay, don't turn into Bigfoot.
Bigfoot is a social distancing champ. You know why?
Because he never...
No one ever gets close to him. He's the champion. You want to say goodbye until next week?
Bye-bye until next week!
All right. You guys have a fantastic